Namaste. So today we're talking about Sabbath, and I think I've talked about Cecile before, but Cecile was a landlady I had, probably my first landlady actually. Yeah, wow, maybe not. No, she was. Anyway, Cecile was this short Polish lady who owned a four-family apartment building on 57th and Valete, more or less. And she was fond of three things: pewter, John F. Kennedy, and pre-Vatican II Roman Catholicism. When you went into her apartment, she had a shelf that ran like a foot below the ceiling, all the way around every room. And every shelf was chock full of pewter plates, most of them John F. Kennedy, or things related to John F. Kennedy. On her end tables, there were pewter statues. I mean, there was more pewter in that house than I've ever seen anywhere but in a shop that sells pewter. And, unfortunately, I lived above Cecile. And Cecile believed that one should not walk on one's floor after 9 o'clock if they lived above it. But even more importantly, whether or not you work 6 days a week, you should never, ever, ever do your laundry on Sunday. In fact, she had a list of things that were permissible on Sunday, both at times of drought and times of non-drought, that went so far as to say, during a time of non-drought, you could water your flowers, but not your lawn, and certainly not trees or shrubberies. And I'm wearing a shirt from Rogers Shrubbery Service from Monty Python and the Holy Grail in her honor today. And it was amazing, the thought that was into this list. You could iron your clothes, but you couldn't wash them, because ironing was a quiet occupation. I don't make a lot of noise when I'm putting clothes in the laundry either, but apparently there's a significant difference. And what she shows us, I think, is this very human tendency to take a religious or spiritual teaching, which in truth, the vast majority of them are rooted in some kind of a common sense response to a need. For example, I don't believe for a minute that there's anything inherently unclean about pork, unless you don't have modern methods of refrigeration and preservation, and you're out wandering about the desert and you notice that when people eat pork, they tend to get sick a lot more often than when they're eating other things. And so suddenly a pig is an unclean animal, and it's not kosher. Same thing is true of shellfish, and there probably was also in that an element of allergy that they didn't understand, but they knew that when some people ate shellfish, they got really sick and even died. So shellfish became unclean. It's a common sense need. Maybe they didn't have the right explanation for the need, but they would incorporate it into religious law so that people didn't get sick or die needlessly. The same thing, I think, is very true about Sabbath. The truth is, everybody needs a day off. But when you let certain people get a hold of that idea, where they're going to run with it is anybody's guess. They might run with it so long that they sit around saying, now which is quieter? The laundry or ironing it? And what did the advent of the electric washing machine and the abandonment of the wringer have to do with whether or not laundry was a quiet occupation? And there's actually people that make a living thinking about this. They're called theologians. And yet, and cardinals, sometimes popes. And then they retire and get a villa. So here's a simple rule that I've come to really enjoy, and I got it, I believe, from John Shelby Spong, who's a retired Episcopal Bishop of Newark. The criteria for whether something is, generally speaking, a good idea or a bad idea, and I would say specifically speaking, something that's morally okay or morally questionable, is whether it's life-giving or life-denying. It makes for a pretty simple distinction. Does not doing your laundry for 6 weeks and going to work in dirty clothes give life to those around you? Or does it deny it? I think it denies it. Does the truth that many people now work weekends or alternating weekends or should do shift work, how does the need to eat impact this idea that our culture once held when I was young, that Sundays, blue laws, nothing went on, you rolled up the sidewalks? That was one rule when there was plenty of Monday through Friday work, and really one income was enough for a household. But now if it comes to a choice between working on Sunday and creating a Sabbath for yourself on Tuesday, and losing your job and not being able to feed your kids, I think it's pretty clear which is life-giving and which is life-denying. It's not really too hard to figure out unless you absolutely need to be certain. And if you absolutely need to be sure you're doing the right thing, the odds are you will decide to do the wrong thing in the name of certainty. You'll decide, well, kids, there's not going to be as much food as there used to be because we don't work on the Sabbath. And then somebody will come along and say, but wait a minute, the Sabbath was initially Saturday. Then you have Seventh-day Adventists. That's what you get when you get too legalistic. In every tradition I can find, there's a notion of Sabbath. In the three readings we had today show how it's applied in Buddhism, Hinduism, and earliest Christianity. That Jesus came along and started to say people are more important than the Sabbath, which is, I believe, the root of a much larger rule. It says that people and their needs are more important than rules. And if a rule is life-denying, the rule has to change or it has to go. But you can't hang on to it using the excuse, this is what God would want. So don't play cards, because that's what God would want. Never mind that you got a brand new refrigerator. Don't put any pork chops in there, because God says pork is bad. Rabbi Rami Shapiro, which is very difficult to say 3 times fast, points out that most of our religious, well, all, I think he would agree, of our religious rules didn't come from God. They came from people who agreed that this is something God would want. And that's great until your understanding of the world starts to grow and evolve. And then with some of those rules, you can't say with as much certainty, this is something God would want. Now, you can still say, I choose to obey the rule. But what you start to lose is the ability to say to somebody else, what you're doing is displeasing to God. Because in truth, what you're doing is displeasing to the people who made their best guess about what it is God might want. And so, one of the reasons I believe the institutional church is in decline is that people have evolved in ways that the church hasn't been able to bring itself to evolve. Because it got caught in this place where it said the church is always right, even when it's wrong. And so, some pretty ridiculous things started to happen. You know, gravity, the planets rotating around the sun. These are all dangerous concepts at one time or another. And it literally took hundreds of years for the church to say, oh, okay, maybe we were, not really wrong, but we're willing to say it, we might have been in error. People see through that pretty quickly. But when it comes to Sabbath, we need to see through the legalism, see through the love of rules more than the love of love, the love of rules over the love of grace, and still be able to recognize that we need to rest. And that probably it's very ideal if we can rest one day a week. I don't think that's changed. But I also don't think we need to be slavishly adhering to rules that turn our day of rest into a day of worry. Am I resting correctly? Am I resting enough? Am I doing the right things while I'm resting? What are we going to do about dinner? Because dinner is work. The difference, I think, between spirituality and religion, although you can have spirituality in religion, is found in the meaning, the root of the word religion, which means to bind back. Spirituality has as its goal, I believe, liberation. And while it's good to be grounded, and it's good to be rooted, and it's good, as one of my favorite teachers in high school said, to know where you've been, where you are, and where you're going, to slavishly tie ourselves back to rules that no longer have a reason is to enter into a prison of our own creation. And when we start to believe that we're doing that in the name of God, we start to get more and more self-righteous, more and more critical of others, more and more worried about those of us who are marginally observant Christians not getting the same time off as highly observant Muslims for their prayers each day. It is nonsense. It has nothing to do with anything life-giving. Imagine if we all said, I'm going to have a Sabbath each week and it's going to be one of the days out of 7. And that's all I'm going to worry about. I'm not going to make myself adhere to any rules during that day, except that I get to rest and do things that refresh me. It might loosen a lot of people up just enough to stop worrying so much about our differences and start appreciating our common needs.